It's often said that if the 20th century was a century of physics, the 21st will be the century of biology. And for that to happen, one of the reasons will be my guest this week, Professor David Baltimore, professor at Caltech.
Hello.
In fact, President Emeritus at such a young age, Nobel laureate 1975. In fact, the year you got your Nobel was the year I graduated in biology. And I've done no biology since then, so I'll be a student in this one rather than...
A lot has happened in biology since then.
Yes, rather than an interviewer.
Okay.
So tell us, do you agree with this expectation that this is a century of biology, or is it journalistic oversimplification?
Well, actually, for me, last century was a century of biology because I grew up in that. I did all my work in the 1900s. And it's amazing to see what happened. So when I started in biology in the 1960s, there was no molecular biology. We just learned about the structure of DNA. We're working out the meaning of that. And everything has blossomed since then. And now we understand all the genes in the human body. Well, at least we know what they are. We don't necessarily understand them. And many diseases have made sense.
We don't always know the whys.
We don't always know the
whats.
Yeah. But for instance, in cancer, in 1960, we had no idea what cancer was about. Today we know cancer is due to genetic mutations. We know a lot of those mutations, know a lot about how it happens, and we're curing some and we're not curing a lot of others.
In fact, I remember I was maybe in class 8 or 9 when Hargobind Khurana got his Nobel, and certainly, at least in India, we became aware of something called RNA, DNA.
Right. Yeah, Gobind was a colleague of mine at MIT. I knew him
Yes.
very well.
Doing very well.
Yes.
But your work was RNA. The more popular one right now is DNA. It's
That's
even
right.
got into dictionaries now. Like,
Yes.
blame my parents.
Crossword puzzles.
Blame
right?
my parents for this.
Right.
So tell us a bit, what is it that any common viewer or reader should know about RNA, which is where you got your Nobel, cracking the RNA?
That's right. I mean, RNA is an intermediate between DNA and the rest of the cell. It carries information out of the nucleus into the cell, and then that information is processed so that the cell knows how to work. That's the major function of RNA. Then there are lots of other functions. In fact, there are functions of RNA that are just coming up now. I'll talk about one of them this afternoon in a talk that I'm giving here in India. MicroRNAs. These are RNAs that control which genes are expressed at what time. And there's a whole world of RNA control that's just opening up now.
In fact, your own work which got you the Nobel in 1975 was about changes that RNA goes through and changes the cell goes through because of RNA.
That's right. We learned that RNA can be made into DNA.
Yes.
And that reverses the standard flow of information in biological systems. It was said that we violated the central dogma of biology in that experiment. And it's been very rich. It turns out that a very large part of our own genomes come about by copying RNA into DNA.
And probably when you were talking about this, that is precisely what was happening in many cells that came up as HIV just 5 or 6 years later.
Yeah, about 10 years later. Right.
10 years.
Right.
I think, if I remember correctly, 5 or 6 years is Nobel, yes.
Yes, that's right.
I think the first...
We did the experiments in 1970, and it was actually 1982 when we began to realize what HIV was.
But are you, then you've been working on genome sequencing also.
Not much.
Not much. But that's been an area of interest.
Yeah.
Are we being too impatient in believing that somehow genome sequencing, biotechnology haven't quite produced the miracles we expected of them in cancer, in HIV, and many other incurable diseases?
I think we've asked for it to happen too fast. Cancer is very complicated. It's not one disease. It's hundreds of diseases. In fact, we're learning more and more about the heterogeneity of cancer now and how many diseases it really is. Could end up 1,000 diseases.